This is Software Meets Business, a podcast sponsored by Head Channel.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Software Meets Business. Today, I am very excited to have Larry Wolff, who is the CEO of Wolff Strategy Partners. They're a digital transformation firm, consultancy. Hi, Larry.
Hi, Rich. Great to see you.
It's good to have you with us. So, if you could just kick off a little bit about who you are and what you're doing currently.
Sure. So thank you for having me. As you said, I'm Larry Wolff. I'm the founder and CEO of Wolff Strategy Partners. We specialize in digital transformation. And why is that? You know, my career has spanned from CIO roles in Global 500 companies to working with startups that have been CIO, CTO, COO, CEO, head of corporate strategy, wore a lot of hats. And my career has really operated at the intersection of strategy, operations, and technology. And as I've evolved my consulting firm over the past 16 years, I realized that those three things, strategy, operations, and technology, really define digital transformation. And in retrospect, I've disrupted a few industries. I helped Microsoft create Expedia a million years ago, totally redefined the travel industry, right? I've done digital disruption in publishing, in education, and that's really evolved to the concept of digital transformation. And today, if companies aren't thinking about digital transformation, they're setting themselves up for disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the Expedia. What happened there? How did you get in to be there to do that?
I was the CIO with Reed Business Information, part of Reed Elsevier, a very large British-Dutch company, one of the largest publishers in the world. And we published interesting things like the official airline guide. If you remember that far back before the internet, we looked in this paper pamphlet that came out periodically and had every flight in the world. And that's how you found your flight and you called the airline and booked it. The sister to that was the Hotel and Travel Index, a thick book of information about every hotel and destination in the world. And we were because of the size of our company, we were in a strategic alliance with Microsoft. And they came to us one day and said, hey, we're thinking about doing a new product, and you have the world's deepest and broadest database of hotels and destinations, and we'd like to do something with that. Well, this is, again, early days of the internet, right? You're talking about mid-90s, I guess, maybe mid to late 90s. And Bill Gates had this vision of trying to get a half a penny to a penny on every transaction conducted on the internet. Again, pre-e-commerce. And we were an advertising sales company, right? You're business to business publishing, you're selling advertising. And so we worked a deal with Microsoft where we provided the data for Expedia, and I worked with some of the engineering team to help shape the product in its early inception. And we had the exclusive ad sales rights, and Microsoft had the transaction revenue. And we did that for quite a while. It was a great experience.
Yeah, I bet. Speaking of which, obviously, and this whole podcast is about how software and business meet each other. And part of that is obviously getting engineers to build systems and products that match the business needs. So where should we start with your experience with that? Because you've got quite a lot to tell us.
That's interesting because, back in my early programming days and early CIO days, I used to say that if you can conceive it, we can build software to make it happen, whatever it is. And we were only constrained by the power of hardware. And today, that hardware constraint is virtually gone. I mean, look at supercomputers, look at what we're doing with AI. But it was interesting because given that mentality of if you can conceive it, we can build it, we did a lot of innovation. I was actually speaking yesterday with a publisher that I worked with 30 years ago, who, again, in the early days of the internet, he came to me and said, hey, this new World Wide Web thing, how can we monetize that? Like, let's go have a slice of pizza and talk. Nobody asked the CIO to go have a slice of pizza and talk, but that was the relationship that we all had with the business folks. And so we came up with an idea and developed a product, and he paid for the entire product development effort in the first 3 weeks of ad sales. And so it's really about, and anybody in software development obviously knows this, it's really about thoroughly understanding the needs of the business. And it's not just a tactical view of what are they trying to do with this particular opportunity, but it's really aligning with the overall enterprise strategy. And whatever it is that somebody's requesting, how does that fit into the strategy? How are we going to monetize it? How are we going to prove the value that it creates? And I think that, IT or technologists in general typically think about the product or system that they're developing, but aren't necessarily thinking about the value that we're creating. And when we talk about value creation, it used to be that technology was used to automate things and drive efficiencies. Well, today it's all about data, right? Data is the new gold. It's the new oil. And I've had countless conversations with CEOs, C-suites and boards where they're telling me all about their business. And when they're all done and they're proud of what they've done, and I'll ask, what about your data? And they look at me with that, tilted head glance like your dog gives you. And I said, well, have you ever thought that your data could be worth more than the rest of your business? And it opens up incredible conversation. So it's really about understanding the overall business strategy and how technology, including data, fits into that and drives value.
Yeah. And so we always talk about what it's like to engage a software team to get a product built. Do you want to take us back to kind of like the earliest time that you did that?
Early and recent, because I've been doing this for a long time. In the early days, you had a business analyst that worked with the business folks and figured out requirements, and the tech folks went and built something. Today, given the low barriers to entry for competition and the extreme capabilities of technology, and an incredible pace at which markets are moving, it's a different ballgame. I think today it's really about getting your market research down first. Like, somebody has an idea and you've got a very short window to complete very thorough market research before somebody else comes in to take over your space. And, you build your MVP, you validate it in the market, you collect feedback, you update that into your beta. I mean, this is all typical stuff. But what I see a lot of companies missing is, okay, you have a great idea, but how does it differentiate? And as a disciple of the balanced scorecard, strategy methodology and a longtime executive and consultant in strategy management, the marriage of strategy and execution, I tell people that you've got to have 3 differentiators. If you don't differentiate, or you have 1 differentiator, you're a commodity and you're competing on price. 2 differentiators, somebody's going to leapfrog you. It's not going to take that long in today's market. But if you have 3 very clear, very distinct differentiators, that's the moat around your castle and nobody's getting in. And so as we're conceiving product, it's not, it starts with understanding the market, but clearly understanding, can we differentiate in 3 distinct ways that put up massive barriers to competition? From there, it becomes a lot easier. Now, product managers and designers can design, and the tech team can build, and we can prove it in the marketplace, collect the metrics. Understanding the right metrics is always key. Are we getting the utilization? Are we getting, session durations that are meaningful? Are we creating stickiness? And that all comes down to a combination of marketing and technology. The UX design, meeting the market's needs, creating things that bring them back to your product. there's a lot going on there, but it's all about differentiation.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the kind of products that you've been part of building along the way in your journey?
Wow, a lot. I've built, obviously, we did the Expedia thing. We built a technology in the publishing company that allowed us to go to print and online simultaneously, which opened up a world of opportunities. We were amongst the first to be able to go from computer directly to the printing press without all the intermediate steps, which meant speed to market. Later on, I worked on a product for another educational publishing company that, again, early days of the internet, connecting people with opportunities, business or educational opportunities. It was revolutionary in its time. Later on, we got into a product that helped IT organizations measure the skills of their people and drive personal development efforts, which was very impactful. And I'm leaving a whole lot out, but most recently I was working with a healthcare software startup where we literally mimicked the behavior of a clinical psychologist to help caregivers of people with dementia. And we created this amazing algorithm, amazing database, the world's first and only validated behavioral intervention database that enabled caregivers to prevent or redirect dangerous behaviors in dementia patients. And those interventions worked almost 90% of the time. So just fascinating how technology can help real people.
Yeah. And to get all of those products built, what kind of teams have you had? Have they all been in-house teams, or have you had external people, or, how's that worked?
It certainly evolved over time. In the early days, it was all in-house and you were almost guessing your best, right? But as software product development has matured, we recognized where we have real core competencies and where we need to supplement. So in some cases, it was outsourcing software development, at least until there was a good enough understanding and financial justification to hire those people in-house. We've often outsourced design because it tends to be a short-term, design for MVP and beta tends to be a short-term engagement. Short-term, it could be months to a year, but still short-term. And then as a product really takes off, now bring that in-house so that there's a little more emotional engagement, a little better understanding, et cetera. Product management has certainly evolved. In the old days, it was project management. Now it's clear product management. Having a product manager that really sits at the intersection of marketing and technology is critical. What's interesting about all this is that there's a very different approach in startups versus mature organizations, right? A mature organization that's well-funded, generating revenue, has an R&D budget, can bring in all the resources they need and build the next product. As a startup, it's exactly the opposite. And this really catches a lot of startups and one of the reasons why most startups will fail. And that is from a funding perspective, you have an idea, you get some kid to build an MVP, you take it to friends and family, and you get a few investors. Well, those investors give you enough funding typically to hire a better software development team, perhaps not US-based, top-notch engineers, but maybe you're going to India, Poland, Ukraine, Pakistan, whatever it might be. And so now you're working at night instead of during the day to try to communicate. And you're getting, your beta product out and it's okay. But what's missing? The absolute very first fundamental thing that any startup has to do is the market research, but they never get the money for the market research. And it's hard to get investors to fund the market research. And so you're often working on a hunch. And in most cases, that hunch may be valid, but not complete about, what the market needs or whether there's a demand for what you're doing. And it's unfortunate that in most startups, they come back after the first product attempt and then do the market. By that time they've got funding, and they realize the mistakes and come back and do the market research. So it's a very difficult cycle. And I think that in business, talent goes a long way. Luck also goes a long way, luck and intuition. And some people just have the intuition that, okay, I think there's a market for this. Mark Zuckerberg had an intuition about Facebook, and Jeff Bezos had an intuition about what Amazon could be beyond a bookseller, right? And so intuition, a little bit of luck, and a lot of tenacity to raise the funds. Unfortunately, as you're raising the funds, you're also giving up control of your own business and hoping that you get a valuation that's high enough to still be able to make money on it in the end. There was a lot in there, but it is a complex world.
Let me just interrupt this podcast for a few seconds. I just wanted to let you know about our wonderful sponsor, Headchannel. Headchannel builds software engineering teams, and they've been building software for clients since 2003. They have a very simple engagement model. Either they develop and run it, or they build it and you run it. They could also help with finding a fractional CTO if you need that support. You can find them at headchannel.co.uk. And now back to the podcast.
So say that someone's doing a startup and they're listening to this. So what would your advice be about, say that they managed to get some kind of idea about or feedback from the market, and then they want to ramp up, the engineering team. Have you got any advice around that?
Yes. It's funny. In the mid 70s, someone created this concept of structured software development, which meant you're doing your requirements collection, you're doing design, but you're generally sitting down and validating that design and validating those requirements before you spend the big money on programming, right? And the same, it's a good lesson because the same needs to hold true today, but it doesn't always. Because software development is so easy to engage in and there's so many resources available and the cost has come down tremendously, over the decades, it's easy to just jump in and start. And companies are missing that piece of validating requirements and design, validating the market needs. And so my advice is, with whatever means you have, try to do that market research first and at least validate your concept. May not be comprehensive, but at least you'll know that there's something there's demand for. And then as you go along, just allocate, even if it's a fraction of your funding, to now really complete the competitive analysis. You have to have competitive analysis to get in front of investors in the first place. You do an investor pitch, you have 20 minutes and 12 slides to convince them to spend a lot of money on you. And the competitive analysis is a key to that. And so somebody, a founder, everybody in a startup is CEO, Chief Everything Officer. And somebody's got to be doing that competitive analysis, that market research, and really knowing who's out there, what the need is, and again, driving differentiation. If you're not differentiated, you don't have a business. And so my biggest piece of advice is I'll say it 100 times, get the market research done.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Obviously you've been in a lot of, worked on a lot of products that have had that. There's this idea sometimes that the software that's being built, the product that's being built needs to be perfect. Does that really exist?
No, no, and it never will. I've seen.
But why is that? Why doesn't it exist?
Because two reasons. One, programmers are human and QA analysts are human, and the user acceptance testing folks are human, and things do get missed. But so really that's one of three reasons that I'll summarize. Second reason is that needs evolve. And so what was well defined at the point of product development probably has evolved during product development until product release. And once the product's out there, and you're gathering customer feedback, you're learning things that you could not have known early on. And so, was the product perfect for what it was meant to do? Sure. But if it's not perfect for what the market really needs, then it's not perfect. And the third thing is that, especially in a startup, you're always working against impossible deadlines. When the investor says, when you tell the investor we got to have this product out, today, right now it's March, we got to have the product out in December. And the investor says, that's great. October would be perfect. And then by the time you get through your market research, October just turned into August. And before you know it, you have a day and a half to build a product. I'm exaggerating, but you're always getting squeezed. Well, that's okay. And we know that, especially in an agile development environment, we can take very deliberate technical debt. So we're going to take some shortcuts that the end user will never see, but we better repay that technical debt, and we better have the discipline to allocate the time, allocate the sprints to repay that debt, so that we're not, essentially building a house of cards. And so perfect software, I think the only way to get to perfect software is to have an unlimited pool of funding to do everything right. And that just doesn't happen. That's not real world.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that startups make, well, not just startups, but people make mistakes when they're trying to, get it built, in terms of hiring the wrong team?
Mm-hmm. Always. Often. Always is an extreme word, but often. And it's interesting when you're hiring a team. You can go find a product manager, you can go find a designer, you can go find programmers, you can go find QA analysts, but they've got to have complementary skills and incredible chemistry, right? In the agile world, we used to take people that were throwing things over the wall at engineers and saying, here, do this, and then pointing fingers at them when it couldn't get done in a reasonable amount of time. And then in the agile world, we're asking them to be equal partners, right? It could be marketing, it could be product, it could be whatever. And so agile has changed the culture of product development and software development. And so you need a very strong relationship between marketing, product management, engineering, et cetera, et cetera. On the product that I was just recently working on, when I came on board, we were working with a development team in India. They were affordable, but they were also terrible. If you're working overseas in a vastly different time zone, if things are going well, you can do follow the sun, right? I'll design while you sleep. You program while I sleep. I test while you sleep. You're getting 24 hours of productivity. But that only works if it's a well-defined product, well-defined specs. But the reality is that you're on the phone, on Zoom, on Slack with that development team throughout the day, answering questions, clarifying. I mean, that's the reality. In the book, it says you design it, and, the product manager gives you specs, and the designer gives you the UX, and boom, the engineers magically create it. I haven't seen anybody that can write a perfect user story. There's always going to be questions. There's always going to be discovery during testing that, oh, what about this? Or, hey, an engineer with great insight into the product says, yes, but if you do that, it's going to impact this other thing over here. And so having that team that's got great communication skills, equivalent expertise across their silos, and wonderful chemistry is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people that we've talked to have said a similar thing about, actually, it's not just as straightforward as having, just hiring a team, telling them what to do and letting them get on with it. You need to be on that journey. It's a bit like getting a builder in your house as well,
Very true.
They say they're going to project manage it, and you end up basically helping them project manage it. But anyway, that's a whole different story.
The builder is a great metaphor too, because as a great example, builder is subcontracting, the electrician comes in and you've got a gang of 4 light switches and they put them across 4 different studs, right? Because that's the electrician's understanding of how to install. And you need that product manager that steps in and says, no, wait a minute, that should all be on one switch plate, right?
Yeah. I want a 4-gang switch plate, not just 4 switches.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, we're sort of coming on to the next bit of the stage, which is you've been a startup and you've created some value in the product, and then actually your product's being used in digital transformation, and you're kind of selling it into the enterprise. So are there some stories and learnings you've got around trying to integrate things into businesses?
This is true. If we talk about digital transformation in general, right? Because most technology initiatives today are creating internal disruption and digital transformation. And if they're doing it right, creating external disruption. A few years ago, I'm going to probably say 10 years ago, when I really started in the digital transformation space, the McKinseys and the Big Four would tell us that 84% of digital transformations fail. It's happy to see that today that number is down to 70%. So 70% of digital transformations fail, and there's a lot of reasons why. And the first and foremost is that you can't think of digital transformation as a technology play. Technology is really key to it. And if you're a startup bringing software into the digital transformation space, that's fine. If you're an enterprise, embarking on a transformation, that's fine. But the first thing you have to realize is that digital transformation is the intersection of strategy, operations, and technology, right? Or I'll call it strategy, culture, and technology. And whether you're delivering a piece of software to a company or you're the company going through the transformation yourself, you have to realize that we're making this change to enhance, improve, dramatically disrupt the way we do business. That means it's probably going to have an effect on every part of the business. If we're changing a product, it's got an impact with marketing and sales and product development and service. If it's manufacturing, it's the same thing. It's going to have an impact on marketing, sales, operations, and so you can probably name every part of the company in the impact that a digital transformation has, which by definition then means that this is a company-wide strategy, an enterprise strategy, a company strategy that has to take all of those silos into effect. And so you create this strategy, which means communication becomes key. Everybody in the organization has to understand their role in this change. Otherwise, you get resistance. You get people that wake up every morning trying to do the best thing they can for the company, not realizing they're going in a completely different direction than what the company's really trying to do. So from a strategy perspective, it's strategy, it's clear objectives, it's clear communications. From a technology perspective, you have to understand all the pieces of the company that this technology is going to disrupt. Several years ago, I was the president and chief operating officer. I think I'm going back about 7 or 8 years. I was the COO for an IT training firm. It wasn't technical training. It was teaching the human side of IT. How do you make IT people consultative and customer service oriented? And we created a business called HR to IT. And the idea was that the HR person that supported IT looked up to the skies and said, what did I do wrong in my life to have to support IT? I don't understand these people. I can't understand the language they're speaking. They're a different breed. Why am I stuck with them? And what we realized was that when it comes to digital transformation, the HR person and the HR and the marketing teams are critical to managing that change. Don't ask IT to manage change. Engineers and technologists, we're not wired that way, right? We're not change agents. But HR, who can align performance objectives across the business with this change, this disruption that we're creating, and marketing that can help communicate the change and the value of the change, the importance of the change, and hey, it's coming, hey, it's almost here, hey, it's here, hey, it's happening. You need all that. That's a whole part of change management. And so the HR leader and the marketing team become absolutely crucial to successful change. It's one of the reasons why a lot of these fail. And so when you're talking about transformation, you're talking about a holistic approach to your business. And the reason that most of these fail is because they don't have an executive sponsorship, or we're counting on IT to lead a transformation. Never a good idea. You need all these other parts. We don't manage the culture of the organization. And there's several reasons, but those are kind of in a nutshell what happens.
Okay. What would you say? I mean, you kind of touched on it there, but is there anything else that causes transformation projects to fail?
One of the ones that we often talk about, but I didn't mention in that diatribe, was the ambiguous definition of digital transformation. You just look at an executive team. Somebody's going to think it's a new piece of software. Somebody's going to think it's an upgrade to our, cloud infrastructure. Somebody else thinks, we just need to build an app. And so having a consistent definition of what this transformation is key, which is why it's so important to embed it in your corporate strategy. Another big one is misunderstanding the digital fluency of your team, of your company, right? I don't care if you're 10 people or 10,000 or 100,000 employees. If this transformation is going to impact most of the organization, you've got to have an understanding of digital fluency. How skilled are these people at using technology and adapting technology? And what do we have to do as part of that transformation effort to make sure we bring these people along and give them the tools and skills they need to succeed? Yeah,
absolutely. So dare I talk about something which seems to be the next hot thing? And so instead of digital transformation, everyone's getting excited about AI transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you on that? What are you seeing in the market?
Part of the reason that I've been successful in my career of 30-something years is a luck or a unique ability to look at the crystal ball and know what's going to make it and what's not going to make it and when, right? I love the Gartner hype cycle. And if you look at AI right now, AI just passed the peak of expectations. Most of AI, I mean, there's a ton of pieces of AI, but in general, AI has hit the peak of expectations and is falling down that slope towards the trough of disillusionment. However, meaning that we thought AI was going to solve world hunger, denuclearize the planet, and create, lifelong, longevity for eternity. And we're realizing that's not necessarily the case. And it's not unusual. I mean, we see that with every technology. But the speed at which AI is moving through the hype cycle is, I think, the fastest I've ever seen. And so I think that as we're coming down that slope into the trough of disillusionment in Gartner terms, I think in the next 12 months, we're going to see it rationalize. And this is a process that often takes several years. But I think we're going to see in the next 12 months where we reach realistic expectations. And so a few things are happening. We have IT leaders that are all excited about AI, going to the senior leadership team or the board and saying, we've got to do AI, we've got to do AI. but they can't articulate a business value proposition on it. And we don't like technology for technology's sake. Or you have boards and CEOs that are saying, we've got to adopt AI, but nobody can articulate why or how. In the investor community, in the startup world, it's a little bit different because AI is sexy and it attracts investors, it attracts dollars. And so some startups are incorporating AI in order to say we're an AI company and it's going to attract dollars. But if it's not creating true differentiation, true competitive advantage, then it's kind of wasteful. So a lot to say on all that, but that's where I see AI now. I think it's got tremendous value applied properly. I can give some examples. Back in about 17, 18 years ago, I was working with a for-profit education company. And in that world, about half of the students that enroll for a semester for classes don't show up. 17-year-old kids that get a job working construction, making good money. Life happens, right? But we realized that we were trying to get, for every kid that enrolled, we're trying to get financial aid and housing and jobs and transportation and whatever else. And we were spending a lot of money on sales leads or enrollees that were not going to come to school. And long story short, we ended up building a predictive model that looked at sales leads, married other data like census information, neighborhood credit information, maybe a couple $100,000 a year worth of data to supplement what we have. And ultimately, we were able to predict with 97% accuracy which sales leads would become students in school. That means we could direct the salespeople and say, see these 150 sales leads you're getting? Work these 50 first and then worry about the rest. And ultimately, that company was about $400 million, and we saved roughly $50 million a year. And I say that company would have been out of business had we not applied that technology. Now, predictive modeling was a very early form or small form of AI, but just a great example. To take it to a bigger example, a company I was just working with the dementia care, we knew how the psychologists approached understanding what was happening with a dementia patient in order to formulate an appropriate intervention. And we modeled that. Like I got to decipher the psychologist's brain instead of the other way around, right? It was quite an exciting venture. But we also knew that we had a ton of other data about other medical conditions, injuries, ailments, demographic information, just tons of information. And I wanted to build a neural network on top of that because the neural network could find correlations in that data that we would never find manually. And so a very practical and competitively differentiating approach to AI in that market. We also use large language models and retrieval augmented generation, RAG, to provide educational materials for these caregivers where we could scan scientific journals that we pre-approved plus our own content, but be able to present that information in language that they could understand, that the layperson could understand. That was absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Larry, I mean, you've talked to us about some really important areas there, and you've got some really, really great insights. So I just want to say thank you for being on our podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I hope this is helpful for the people that are listening.
Indeed. Thanks, Larry.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Software Meets Business, the podcast sponsored by Head Channel. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your preferred platform.